"You'll rot here." That's what Declan said, as he shoved the door closed hard enough that the frame rattled. I barely had time to step back before the bolt clicked. I reached for the knob, turned, pulled, nothing. On the other side of the wood, I heard his boots scuff once across the porch, and then silence. Not even a goodbye, not even a glance through the narrow window beside the door. Just the bolt, the silence, and the sound of a key turning in the outside lock. I didn't move, not right away. I stood there in my hallway, hands still curled at my sides, waiting for the knock that never came. It had happened so fast. Just an hour ago, Declan had asked me to come to the country house for the weekend. Just to check in Ma. Maybe clean out a few old boxes. His voice was soft, reasonable. That voice he used when he wanted something. I said yes, because that's what I always did. He'd driven me out himself. Carried my bag, even stopped at a diner along the way. I should have known something was off when he didn't eat, when he didn't talk much, when Skye, his wife, didn't even come along. He walked me inside, put the bag by the stairs. I went to plug in the kettle, make coffee, start the routine. That's when he grabbed my phone from the kitchen counter and threw it hard against the tile floor. The screen exploded into white cracks. I stared at the pieces, then at him. He didn't yell. He didn't have to. He just stepped forward, wrapped one hand around my shoulder, and marched me back to the front door. Then the shove, then the lock, and now nothing. I tried the back door. Locked. Deadbolt key only. I checked the windows nailed shut. Every one. They'd prepared this. Not just him, Skye too. She never wanted me near their children, near their home. And now I knew why. I walked back to the living room slower now, heart pounding not from fear but disbelief. No phone, no landline, no signal even if I had one. I sat down on the couch I once paid for. Same one Declan spilled juice on when he was 6. Same one I nursed him through a fever on when he was 12. It sagged slightly beneath me like it remembered. Like it was tired, too. I stood again. Walked to the kitchen. Fridge empty. Cabinets bare except for an opened bag of stale flour and 2 cracked bowls. Not even coffee. Declan knew better than to leave me something that could comfort. I opened the faucet. Nothing. He'd shut off the water. He wanted me gone, but he couldn't just say it. Couldn't stomach looking like the bad son. So he planned this instead. Starve me out. Break me down. Let the silence do the work for him. But he forgot one thing. I'd survived worse. Worse than an empty kitchen. Worse than a locked door. Worse than a son, too cowardly to say he hated me. I moved toward the hallway, toward the part of the house they never cared about. The one they always said smelled like mildew and mothballs. The one they never asked me about even when I spent hours down there during storms. I touched the floorboard with my foot. The loose one. Still there. Still mine. I checked every window twice. The latches had been sealed from the outside nails driven deep into the frames. Even the one in the laundry room, the one Declan once used to sneak back in after a party, had been hammered shut. He remembered that window. He remembered everything. There were no keys anywhere, not on the hook by the back door, not in the ceramic bowl by the fridge where I used to keep the spares. I even checked behind the dusty cookbook in the cabinet above the stove, the one place I used to hide extra cash and tiny things meant to be found in emergencies. But there was nothing. Not even dust had the decency to feel familiar anymore. I walked to the pantry. It was bare. A few empty glass jars, a sticky shelf where molasses once spilled, and a single rusted can of peas without a label. It looked like it had been placed there deliberately, like some cruel gesture that said, "Here, this is what you get." Even the fridge had been scrubbed clean, not a slice of bread, not a leftover, not a drop of milk. Just the dull hum of cold air and a single rubber band stuck to the bottom shelf. I closed it gently. It wasn't neglect. It was calculation. They didn't forget to stock the kitchen. They emptied it. Just like they'd been trying to empty me for years, slowly, surgically, with smiles and suggestions, until one day there was nothing left but a woman they could lock away without protest. I stood still in the center of the kitchen, the tile cold beneath my feet. My mouth was dry. My stomach churned, not from hunger yet, but from the knowledge that this was the plan. Not an accident. Not a misunderstanding. He wanted me to fade, quietly, without blood, without bruises, just slowly enough that no one would ask questions. Declan always was tidy like that. I opened the faucet again, hoping for the sound of pressure of flow, but nothing came. Only a tired creak in the pipe, then silence. The water shut-off valve had to be outside by the foundation. He would have known how to close it. I'd shown him myself when he was 16, and we had that plumbing leak after the winter freeze. Back then, he looked at me like I could fix anything. Now he looked at me like I was something to be erased. I opened every drawer, even the broken one with the missing handle. No flashlight, no matches, no batteries. It felt staged, like a set someone had cleared before striking the lights. But he forgot the hallway. He forgot the floorboard. I walked back toward it, heart louder than my footsteps. The hallway was narrow, still lined with old wallpaper peeling at the corners. I knelt down and pressed my hand against the board that always creaked. It gave slightly. Still loose. Still here. I wedged my fingers beneath the edge and pulled. Skye never raised her voice. That was the thing. Not once in all the years she'd been married to Declan did I ever hear her shout, slam a door, or curse out loud. But somehow, she always made sure I felt unwelcome without ever saying the words. "You're just extra weight," she once said. Smiling, napkin in hand, voice sweet as sugar, but colder than winter. It was during one of those forced family dinners, the kind where I brought dessert and she brought tension. She said it after asking how long I planned to stay in that house all by yourself. Said it like she was worried about me, like she was helping, but her eyes never matched the tone. I remember staring at her plate that night, 3 bites eaten. She always acted too refined to finish anything. She'd nudge her food around, then pass her compliments like currency never free. The smirk came often, at birthdays, at Christmas, especially when I gave gifts she didn't approve of. Books instead of money, sweaters instead of spa certificates. One year, I brought a framed photo of Declan when he was 10, tooth missing, holding a drawing he made of me. She didn't even unwrap it fully, just said, "Oh, nostalgia," then handed it off to one of the kids like it was a used tissue. The first time I truly saw it, that smirk with teeth, was when they suggested I sell the house. They sat me down, both of them, but it was Skye who spoke. "Calla, it's not safe for someone your age to live so far from everything. And let's be honest, that house is a lot to manage." Her words were gentle, her hands folded neatly in her lap, but her smile, it was the kind that knew the outcome already. Like she'd already picked out paint swatches for my walls. I said I'd think about it. I didn't. I went home and cried in the kitchen for an hour before making myself a pot of black coffee, the way I always did when I needed to remember who I was. After that, they tried less subtle tactics. Lost my mail once. Missed a call from my doctor, said the message never came through. Skye told a neighbor I was getting forgetful. Another time, she offered to take over my prescriptions just to keep it simple. I knew what she was doing, but it was Declan's silence that hurt more than her words. He never stopped her, never corrected her, just sat there nodding like it was too late to choose a side. I remember one afternoon when I brought over groceries. Their youngest had the flu and I wanted to help. Skye opened the door halfway, looked at the bags in my hands, then said, "We're good, but thanks." No eye contact, no invitation in, just a step back and a closed door. Later, Declan texted Skye's just overwhelmed. I wanted to text back, so was I. For 20 years, alone, with you, but I didn't. I learned to stay quiet, to stay out of the way, to make myself small enough that even their smirks wouldn't catch on me. But now, standing above this open floorboard, I realized something. I hadn't been small. They just refused to see me. And maybe now they finally would. The first time Declan forgot my medication, I brushed it off. He'd offered to pick it up from the pharmacy, something I'd always done myself, but that week my knees were acting up and he insisted. Said it would be no trouble. I gave him the slip, reminded him twice, and even texted a picture of the bottle. 3 days later, nothing. No pills. Just an awkward shrug when I asked. They must have messed up the order, he said, already walking out of the room. I went to the pharmacy myself that afternoon, dragging my legs down each step. The pharmacist looked confused. It was picked up on Monday, she said. Signed for by Declan Brentwood. I didn't ask him about it again. What would have been the point? A week later, Skye brought over pamphlets. Just for information, she'd said. Her tone was sugar-sweet, but her eyes moved too fast. They have an on-site nurse, laundry services, even a crafts room. You'd love the community. Community? They wanted me behind a gate. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere far. I was still telling myself it was concern. That maybe they were clumsy, not cruel. That maybe I was being paranoid. It's strange how easily we doubt ourselves when the doubt comes from the people we love most. Then came the missing mail. I stopped getting my utility bills. I missed a water payment, then 2. When I finally drove to the post office to ask, the clerk leaned over the counter. Oh, your daughter-in-law picked them up. Said she was managing the house now, managing. No one told me I needed managing. The next week, Skye sat me down after dinner. Declan wasn't home. Calla, you've done enough. You've worked hard. You deserve to rest. She pushed a brochure across the table. Places like these, they let you keep your dignity. I stared at the word dignity like it meant something else, and I said nothing. That silence, mine, was the biggest crack. The one they built their plan around. The one that told them I wouldn't fight. After that, the house started to feel less like mine. Skye redecorated the guest room. Declan put up security cameras and said it was for my safety. I caught Skye in my bedroom once sorting through old papers. She smiled and said she was just helping me stay organized. I nodded. I let it happen. Because the truth is, I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to think my son would turn me into a burden just so he could erase me. But now, down here on the cold concrete floor of this basement, I can see it clearly. This wasn't sudden. They've been softening the ground for months, maybe years. One accident at a time, one forgotten pill, one sealed window, one smile that meant, shut up and step aside. I reached for the old toolbox under the shelf. My fingers curled around the handle. The weight of it felt familiar, like something that once belonged to someone who could fix things. And maybe I couldn't fix Declan. Maybe I couldn't fix what I'd ignored, but I could fix this. The first day, the hunger was a whisper. By nightfall, it spoke in full sentences. By morning, it was screaming. I found one stale cracker under the basement shelf, sealed in the corner of an old tin from Christmas 2 years ago. I split it in half. Ate one piece. Saved the rest. I don't know why. There's no one here to ration for. No one coming. But I saved it anyway. Habit, maybe. I'd gone without meals before. When Declan was little and the lights were nearly cut off, I used to tell him I wasn't hungry, just tired. I'd lie down on the couch, drink a glass of water, and let my stomach settle into emptiness. You get used to the ache. But this wasn't about getting through a hard month. This was deliberate, designed. It was the thirst that broke me. By mid-morning, my tongue was swollen. My lips cracked at the edges, and when I swallowed, it felt like gravel catching in my throat. I checked every pipe in the basement, every inch of copper and rust. Dry. I cupped my hand under a spigot and waited. But nothing came. He'd turned it all off from the outside. He knew where the shutoff was. I'd shown him during that cold snap 2 winters ago. I sat on the bottom step, staring up through the faint shaft of light that bled through the crack under the main floor door. I remembered Skye saying once, "People over 60 need structure. It keeps them from spiraling." She said it in front of me as if I wasn't even there. I didn't respond. And now here I was, structured, right into silence. But even that wasn't the worst part. The worst part wasn't my empty stomach or the burning in my throat or the pounding behind my eyes from dehydration. The worst part was the certainty, knowing with no room for doubt that my son, my only child, planned this. That he looked at me, remembered everything I did for him, and still locked the door. That he sat beside me at dinner 2 nights ago past me. The salt laughed at my story about the neighbor's cat, and already knew he'd be sealing the windows shut. I thought there might be a moment where I'd cry, where the betrayal would swell so big it would pour out of me. But there was nothing, just that strange quiet, that clarity that comes when the last excuse breaks. He wants me gone. And Skye, she never wanted me there to begin with. They could have done it clean, sent me papers, given me notice. But they didn't want clean. They wanted forgotten. I looked around the basement, blinking against the low light. There were still things here, not just tools, memory things. The folding table from when Declan had his science fair project, the quilt box I used to keep in the corner when my hands could still manage a needle. They hadn't come down here in years. They thought this space was dead. They were wrong. I pushed aside the old crates, cleared a path to the far corner. There was something else I remembered, a stack of emergency boxes. My husband had packed them before his first surgery, just in case. He always did have a plan for what might go wrong. And maybe he had one for this too. I had nearly forgotten about the crawl space. It came back to me while I was sitting on the concrete floor, knees stiff, mouth dry, watching light shift against the far wall. The memory came uninvited, a flicker from years ago, back when Declan was in high school and had a habit of losing things. He'd dropped his school ID somewhere in the hallway, and I found it days later after my heel caught the edge of a loose floorboard. It creaked differently than the others, hollow underneath. I'd meant to fix it. But time passed. Declan moved out. Then Robert got sick. And in the months that followed, little things like floorboards and toolkits stopped mattering. But now it mattered. I forced myself to stand, legs trembling under me. I took the stairs one at a time until I reached the hallway. My head throbbed. The kind of pain that wraps around the skull and makes thinking feel dangerous. But I knew where to go. I pressed my foot near the baseboard just outside the linen closet. The board gave the same way it used to, soft under pressure, a tired exhale of wood. I dropped to my knees and clawed at the edges with my fingernails. No tools, no leverage, just fingers and grit. The wood splintered beneath my touch, but I didn't stop. Not when pain flared. Not when the taste of blood hit my tongue from biting down too hard. I pulled, and it came free. The opening wasn't large, just enough to fit a body if you angled in sideways. Beneath it, the shallow crawl space stretched in both directions, north toward the back wall and east under the laundry room. I remembered Robert using this space during tornado warnings. He kept backup supplies down here, camping gear, old batteries, a solar lantern, even a water filter system we bought once and never unpacked. No one else knew about it. Declan wouldn't remember. He hated tight spaces as a boy, and Skye never came down this hallway without sneering at the wallpaper. I dropped into the space, the air damp and stale. The floor beneath me was packed dirt, and the smell was musty like old rain and forgotten fabric. But it was cooler than the basement. And quiet. I crawled forward, arms shaking, eyes scanning for anything I could use, and then I saw it. The red metal box. Exactly where Robert said he'd keep it. behind the insulation panel. It was still taped closed with his old handwriting across the lid, "Emergency only." I pulled it toward me, heart pounding in my throat. My hands trembled as I peeled back the tape, breath shallow. Inside a sealed pouch of cash, a folded copy of our deed, a flashlight, and at the bottom, nestled beneath an old flannel rag, a prepaid burner phone, the kind we bought years ago when the cell towers failed during a storm. I had never activated it. Robert insisted we keep it in case something ever went really wrong. I held it like it was made of gold, dust-covered but whole. I pressed the power button. Nothing. Dead. But the charger was in there too, and I knew where the lantern was, the one that powered off sunlight. I'd seen it in a separate crate just before I opened the floorboard. I had something they didn't know about, something they didn't plan for. And tomorrow, if the sun was strong enough through that basement window, I would have power. I carried the red box back into the crawl space like I was holding a newborn. Dirt under my knees, sweat lining my back. I tucked myself into the narrowest part of the house and opened it slowly, afraid the years might have rusted the hinges shut, but it opened without a sound. Even after all this time, Robert's handwriting still stared back at me in that neat block lettering. For emergency use only. He had written that the week after his first hospital scare, when the diagnosis wasn't final yet, when we still believed he might pull through. He'd packed the box quietly without asking. I found it a month later, and we never talked about it. I used to be angry at him for being so grim, so prepared for a world where I was alone. But sitting there now, cross-legged beside moldy insulation and forgotten baseboards, I was grateful. Inside, the flashlight was there, wrapped in the same faded cloth. The batteries were stored separately, sealed in a plastic bag. A thick envelope sat beneath it, emergency cash still folded and banded along with a notarized copy of the property deed. My name, only my name. I touched the edge of the paper like it might vanish. They never knew I'd changed the deed. Declan never asked. Skye assumed. That was her habit, walk into a room and act like it was hers by default. They didn't know about the trust either. Robert helped me move the house into it before he passed, said it would protect me from family favors gone sour. I thought he was being dramatic. He wasn't. At the bottom of the box under the deed and a laminated emergency contact list from 2009 was the phone. Still wrapped. Still unregistered. A prepaid model with a thick body and no apps, just a keypad and a blinking red light that meant one thing: dead battery. I held it against my chest and let myself breathe. There was no joy in finding it. No triumph, just relief, like I'd been walking underwater for days and someone cracked open the surface. I backed out of the crawl space and eased the box into the basement, using the lantern to guide my way. I kept the phone in my pocket, like if I let go of it, the house might swallow it back. The solar charger was where I remembered, buried in the bottom of a storage bin, beside an old raincoat and a rusted thermos. I propped the charger against the edge of the window well, where the morning sun would hit. Slid the charging cable into the phone and watched for the screen to blink. It didn't, not right away. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. Then one tiny vibration. A dim glow. A battery symbol crawling up from empty. It was working. Not fast, not full, but enough. I carried the lantern back to my corner of the basement and sat against the wall. My mouth was still dry, my stomach a hollow drum, but my hands didn't shake anymore. Tomorrow, if the charge held, I'd send one message. Just one. And that would be enough to start everything. The phone lit up just after sunrise. I sat by the window, well back against the wall, watching the glow creep across the floor, like it was testing whether I was still alive. The solar charger was slow but steady. I hadn't moved it all night. I was afraid to. As if one shift in its angle might steal the charge back from me. The battery blinked red, then orange. I turned on the phone. It took longer than I remembered for it to boot old systems dragging their feet after years in silence. The screen flickered once then again before finally settling into the home menu. One bar of signal. Just one. It was enough. I opened the contacts. There were only 2 names in there. One was Robert's number disconnected for years. I didn't delete it. Couldn't. The other was labeled simply A. Amara. Amara Blevins had once lived across the street from me in the city. Widowed young, sharp as nails. Too loud for some people, too nosy for others. But not for me. She brought me soup when Robert was in hospice. She fixed the fence when Declan forgot. And when I told her I was putting the house in a trust, she nodded like she'd already seen this movie before. After she moved away, we kept in touch. A few emails, a birthday call. Then she landed a job as a legal assistant for a firm in Lexington. Not big, but solid. I always meant to thank her for helping file that last set of paperwork, but life got messy. Now she was the only person who might still listen. I opened a new message. Fingers trembling, I typed slow, 1 letter at a time, pausing between each word to breathe through the cramping in my hands. It's Calla. I'm locked in. No food, no water. Basement access. Can't call. Text only. I hit send. And waited. I kept the phone in my lap like it was an animal I was trying not to startle. Every few minutes I tapped the screen to make sure the signal hadn't dropped. The bar stayed. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. I felt the weight of it pressing on my chest again. Not panic this time, not hunger, but dread. What if the number had changed? What if she'd forgotten me? What if the message never reached her? The reply came at minute 21. Got your message. Don't respond. Stay quiet. I'm working on it. Then another. I have the documents, the trust, the power of attorney reversal. Sit tight. Don't touch the door. My eyes burned, but I didn't cry. I set the phone on the ground beside me and leaned my head back against the wall. She remembered. She still had everything. I closed my eyes for just a moment, and for the first time in days, I didn't feel alone. I didn't feel erased. They thought I had no one. They thought I had nothing left but silence. But silence in the right hands can echo. The first drops hit the glass like a whisper. I'd been sitting under the window, back braced against the stone, when the shift in air came cooler, gentler. Then the light dimmed. A breeze curled in through the broken seal, bringing with it the scent of wet leaves and dust. Rain. I pulled the old mixing bowl from the supply crate and wedged it beneath the opening. Tilted just right, it caught every drop that slid down the glass. I sat and watched it fill, slow and patient. A rhythm, one I could measure against my heartbeat. When the bowl was half full, I brought it to my lap with both hands. It trembled slightly. I hadn't realized how weak I'd gotten until then. I sipped. Not gulps, just half a mouthful held like something sacred, swished around my teeth before I let it go down. Cool and sharp against my throat. Not clean, not filtered, but real. I took another sip. Then I stopped. If I finished it all now, there'd be nothing left when the ache returned. I took the second mixing bowl and placed it beneath the window again, this time angling it against the lantern crate to catch more runoff. The rain wasn't heavy, more a drizzle. But drizzle was hope. Drizzle could stretch. Back in the far corner, behind a rotting stack of storage bins, I found the second cracker. It wasn't wrapped, just wedged inside an old paper napkin. Probably left behind when Robert was organizing one of his bug-out kits. We always joked about them. He liked to pretend we'd be the kind of people to survive disaster with a flashlight and duct tape. I split the cracker in half. Ate the smaller piece first. Dry soft at the edges, but edible. I chewed slowly. Counted to 30 before swallowing. My hands stopped shaking after that. Not from strength, just from stillness. I wasn't moving as much. My body had learned to conserve. I used to feed Declan like this when we were short on groceries. Peanut butter and crackers split between 2 paper towels. He never noticed. I made it look like a choice. Picnic dinner, I'd say. We'll eat something real tomorrow. Now, here I was, decades later, doing it again. But not for a child. For myself. Because the child I fed grew into a man who decided I'd had enough. The rain eased. The second bowl was nearly full. I drank half, then poured the rest into a mason jar I found beneath the workbench. It still had its lid. 3 sips in the jar. 2 in the bowl. 1 half cracker wrapped in cloth and tucked inside my shirt. Everything became a number. I'd rationed before money heat medicine. Now I was rationing survival. I wasn't scared. Not in the way people think. Fear is loud. This was quieter. A cold kind of knowing. They didn't expect me to last long. They thought I'd panic, collapse, beg. They underestimated me. They always had. And tomorrow, if the weather held, I'd have just enough charge left to send a second message. I hadn't meant to look at the photo. It slipped out of a box of winter gloves I was rummaging through for insulation scraps. Bent at the corner, stuck to the back of a yellowing holiday card. Declan, 6 years old. Gap-toothed and grinning front porch behind him, crooked shoelaces hanging over untied sneakers. He held up a drawing me with wild hair and giant glasses, standing next to a sun that took up half the sky. I sat down hard on the basement step, that photo trembling in my hand like it remembered more than I did. I used to keep it on the fridge back in the city house. He gave it to me after the first week of first grade. I'd framed it in a plastic sleeve and promised I'd never throw it away. I'd meant it. Now I turned it over. Nothing written. Just blank space. I tried to see the boy I raised. The boy who used to cry when I clipped his fingernails too short. The boy who couldn't fall asleep unless I sat at the edge of his bed and hummed that off-key tune Robert used to whistle. I tried, but all I could see was motive. I saw the man who asked for control of my prescriptions just to help. I saw the husband who told his wife I was slipping, that I forgot things I never forgot. I saw the smirk he didn't bother to hide when Skye mentioned power of attorney. I used to think if I could just remind him, if I could show him the old pictures, the home videos, the birthday cards he made from construction paper, that he'd remember who I was, what I meant. But maybe he remembered just fine. Maybe remembering made it easier. You don't rob a stranger. You rob someone you know won't fight back. I stared at the picture until my eyes burned. Not from tears. From the effort of trying to see something that wasn't there anymore. The past doesn't speak. It just waits to be rewritten. Declan had rewritten me. From mother to obstacle. From provider to squatter. From home to liability. I folded the photo in half and tucked it between the pages of a water-warped book. I didn't throw it away. I couldn't. But I couldn't look at it either. Not anymore. Not when I knew that while I sat in a basement sipping rainwater, my son was out somewhere, holding Skye's hand sipping wine on a deck that tilted with ocean waves, telling people he was on vacation, smiling, pretending his mother was fine. That boy in the picture would have never left me behind. But that boy doesn't exist anymore. And the man he became, he'll wish he'd left me with less. The phone buzzed in my lap like a heartbeat. I looked down. The message preview lit up across the small screen, cutting through the dark like a sliver of sunrise. Amara, I'm here. Stay low. I have your documents. I didn't move at first. Just stared at the words until they blurred. My body reacted before my brain could catch up, shoulders folding inward, a single breath, catching at the top of my lungs, then releasing all at once. She got it. She read it. She believed me. I hadn't realized how long I'd been holding on to the fear that even if someone did receive my message, they wouldn't take it seriously. That maybe I'd become the woman Skye described in whispers. confused, emotional, unreliable. But Amara didn't ask questions. She answered. My hands still trembled as I reached for the phone, but it wasn't panic anymore. It was something steadier, tighter. Focus. I typed back slowly, fingers stiff. I can't leave. No water, but rain. 1 bar of signal. They took everything. Seconds passed. Then her reply. Do not engage. I'm pulling records and confirming the trust. I'll loop in our lead counsel quietly. Then another. Your son's name isn't on the deed. You were right to act when you did. I sat down against the far wall and let that settle over me. Not relief confirmation. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. I was right. And Robert had been right too. We had locked the right doors years ago. Declan just didn't know it. The next message came 5 minutes later. I'll initiate the freeze on your assets this afternoon. It may take 24 to 48 hours. Sit tight. I reread that phrase, sit tight, and nearly laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was true in the purest sense. There was nowhere to go, nowhere to run. But sitting tight didn't feel helpless anymore. It felt like coiled wire. I closed the phone and set it back in the box for safekeeping. Every charge mattered. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and pictured Amara in her little office downtown sleeves, rolled hair, in that messy knot she always wore when she meant business. They always thought she was too loud, too opinionated, too much. That's what Skye said once when I mentioned Amara helping with the trust. She seems intense. Skye didn't like intense women. She preferred them pliable, apologetic. But Amara never apologized for knowing the law better than most men in the room. And now she was my lifeline. The lifeline they mocked. The one they overlooked. The one with the power to unravel everything they'd been building in silence. I pulled the blanket tight around my shoulders and curled into the corner. I didn't cry. I didn't celebrate. I just watched the faint glow of the charging light blink in rhythm, steady and calm. Tomorrow, if her next message came through, I'd be ready. Declan always liked order. Even as a child, he needed his crayons arranged by shade. Blue, never next to green. He'd line up his toys in rows before he played with them, and if one was out of place, the game stopped until he fixed it. Back then, I called it focus, discipline. I told myself it meant he'd grow up to be responsible, precise. Better than the men I'd dated, better than his father, in the end. I clung to the idea that his sharpness meant strength, but now I see it wasn't about focus. It was about control. Control disguised as preference. Control passed off as just trying to help. He liked setting the rules, and slowly, over the years, he began setting mine. It started with little things. The thermostat. Don't touch it, Ma, I already programmed it. Then my schedule. Don't worry about groceries, I'll order them online for you. You don't need to be walking that far. Then my bank account. Just link your card to mine, it'll help me keep track for taxes. He always said it like he was protecting me, like letting go of responsibility was a kindness. You've done enough, Ma. Let me take care of it now. I wanted to believe that. But then he began asking questions that didn't sound like care. Do you still have that life insurance policy? Who gets the house if something happens to you? You ever think about writing a new will? He said it all, like he was just preparing, like any good son would. And I told myself it was normal, that I should be grateful, but it wasn't gratitude he was after. It was access. When I finally told him I had already set up a trust, already spoken to a lawyer, he didn't ask questions. He didn't offer support. He just went quiet, the kind of quiet that builds into something dangerous. I think that was the moment he knew I wouldn't hand it over. And from then on, it was all grooming. He'd show up more often, but only when Skye was with him. She'd smile, bring muffins, compliment my curtains, then casually mention how hard it is to keep up 2 properties. Declan stopped calling me Ma when he spoke about me to others. He started saying my mother, like I was a formal obligation, not a person, a clause in his future inheritance. The last birthday I spent with them, he gave me an organizer leather-bound labeled color-coded. I thought it was thoughtful. Then I opened it and found it filled with his calendar, his deadlines, his reminders for my appointments. He wasn't giving me tools. He was assigning me a role, and that role didn't include independence. It didn't include ownership. It certainly didn't include survival. When I started forgetting small things, where I left the keys, what day the garbage truck came, he noticed faster than I did. He started dropping hints. She's been a little scattered lately. Maybe a nurse would help just a few times a week. I hadn't lost my mind. I'd lost my place in his version of my story. And once I no longer fit, he began writing me out. Now, locked in this basement, counting sips of water and recharging my phone with sun trickling through a crack in the glass, I finally understand. The sun I raised didn't vanish. He evolved. And his version of love always ended with him holding the pen. The house was never theirs. Not by law, not by blood, not by right. But they always moved through it like it was owed to them. Skye walked in with measuring tape 3 months after their wedding. She wasn't shy about it. If we ever inherit this place, I'd knock down that wall, she said, gesturing to the space I'd painted myself just after Robert passed. Open concept. Brighter. She said, inherit like it was guaranteed, like the ink had already dried on a future I hadn't signed. Declan didn't correct her. He just sipped his coffee and nodded. That night, I lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling fan, heart pounding. And in the morning, I called Amara. She didn't ask why. She just said, I'll meet you at the bank. We set up the trust that same week. Quietly, cleanly. A private trust in my name, revocable only by me, overseen by a firm Skye had never heard of. It protected the deed, the land, even the accounts tied to the property. I left the old records in the kitchen drawer, the ones with both Declan's and my names, listed from when he helped co-sign during a refinance. That's what they found when they snooped. That's what they thought gave them power. But that paper was outdated. Symbolic. And I let them believe it. I let them walk through my house talking about when it's ours. Let them mock my calendar, judge my furniture, rearrange my kitchen drawers. Because I knew the truth was in a safety deposit box under my signature. Skye once told me modern women don't hang on to dusty homes. They know when it's time to let go. I smiled and held the key in my pocket. They never once asked the right questions. They never noticed the mail stopped including mortgage updates. Never saw that the land tax paperwork was addressed to the trust itself. They assumed. Assumption was their favorite currency. And now they were off sailing, thinking the home they'd left me to die in would be theirs by default. But it never was. Not for a second. And now that Amara had pulled the documents, now that she'd confirmed what I already knew, the next step would be simple. Legal, quiet, binding. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need confrontation. I just needed them to come home and realize too late that the game they'd been playing ended before it even began. They thought this place was a stepping stone, something to absorb, something to outlive me. But I outlived them in every way that matters. I stood and walked slowly to the far end of the basement, where the lockbox sat next to my makeshift cot. I opened it again, not because I needed to, but because I could. The deed was still there. My name, my trust, my house. I unfolded it carefully and laid it on top of the box, smoothing out the creases with the palm of my hand. Then I reached for the phone. The screen flickered awake. One new message. Amara. The freeze has been initiated. I'll notify you when it's complete. Hold steady. I placed the phone down gently and stared at the words until they stopped feeling like a warning and started feeling like a promise. Amara didn't waste time. By noon the next day, she'd filed the transfer documents. The trust protections were activated. The estate, every account, every parcel of land tied to my name was locked. Frozen like lake water in January. Untouchable. She didn't send me paragraphs, just clean updates in short bursts. Trust active. Notice served via certified courier. Power of attorney revoked. Filed. I read those lines like they were prayers. Not the kind whispered in churches, but the kind you speak into the dark when you've run out of choices. She'd already coordinated with her firm's lead attorney. He'd reviewed the paperwork we drew up years ago when Declan still called me Mom, and Sky still pretended to care. All it took was the right trigger to set the plan in motion. Being locked in a basement without food or water, that was enough. By the time the second wave of documents went out, estate access freeze emergency motion to review medical guardianship claims, Amara had sent me one last message. If they try to touch anything, it'll notify us. And trigger a flag with the court. I set the phone down and stared at the floor for a long while. I wasn't hungry anymore. Not really. I didn't feel the dryness in my mouth the same way. What I felt was distance between me and the woman they thought they were burying. I used to wonder what winning looked like. Turns out it looks like a frozen account and a silent name on a deed. Meanwhile, on the other side of the country, Sky was posting selfies. I saw them through Amara's screenshot, her arm draped around Declan's shoulder, her other hand holding a glass of champagne. The caption read, "Finally free. Salt air, no drama." No drama. They left me in a locked house without food or water and called it peace. The comments were full of heart emojis and compliments on her sun hat. No one asked where Declan's mother was. No one ever does. I stared at their smiles. Not with anger, not with bitterness. I just observed. They really believed I was already gone. The house was just the final detail to clean up when they returned. Except now, there was nothing to return to. The house was mine. The accounts were sealed. The paperwork they once waved in my face was now just paper. And me? I was still here. I laid back on the cot and stared up at the ceiling. There were cracks in the concrete above little veins in the stone I'd never noticed before. They looked like branches reaching. I thought about the early days when Robert and I first bought the place. Before it was insulated. Before the walls were finished. When Declan was a toddler and ran barefoot across the subfloor, laughing like the world owed him nothing but joy. Somewhere along the way, he decided that joy had a cost, and he'd been willing to make me pay it. Now the world was shifting back, quietly, without screaming, without threats. All I had to do was wait for the tide to reach them. And it would. It always does. The phone buzzed so hard against the concrete it startled me. I grabbed it before it vibrated off the edge of the cot. I didn't recognize the number, but I didn't have to. I knew that rhythm, that desperation. I answered without a word. Declan's voice hit me like a storm. Undo it. No hello, no pause. Just rage. You had no right to freeze our accounts, no right to block access. Are you insane? Do you have any idea what you've done? I listened. His voice cracked halfway through the next sentence. Sky's card got declined at dinner. They froze my business account. My business mother. You've humiliated us. He spat the word mother like it hurt his teeth. I let the silence stretch. It only made him angrier. You're not thinking clearly, he snapped. They'll think you're unstable. You can't just do things like this. I closed my eyes, listening to the panic under his fury, the trembling edge of a man who had never been told no. Not by me. Not by anyone. You betrayed us, he hissed, after everything we've done for you. That was the moment I spoke. Quietly. Calmly. This house was never yours. There was a beat of silence on the other end, then another. You don't mean that he said lower now, almost soft. You're confused. This isn't you. He was shifting gears, playing the card he always played when anger didn't work concern. The voice he used when he wanted to sound like the good son again. But I wasn't confused. I wasn't lost. I had never seen things more clearly. You've been planning this, I said, keeping my voice steady. For months. Years, maybe. No, he said quickly. Sky thought. Don't blame your wife for this, I cut in. You knew what you were doing. You locked me in here. You shut off the water. You emptied the kitchen. He didn't deny it. He just went quiet again. Then low and bitter, he said, We thought you'd understand. I do, I said. I understand exactly who you are now. The line stayed open for a long moment. I could hear something in the background, waves maybe. Wind. Then a door slammed. He was back inside. The cruise was over. Good. Let him come home. Let him see what happens when the ground you plan to stand on disappears beneath your feet. Kala, he tried again. Voice tighter now. If you just reverse it before this gets public, it's already public, I said. Check your inbox. Amara had sent them notice through every channel. Certified, legal, documented. And she'd CC'd the Office of Adult Protective Services, just in case. He swore. Not at me. Just into the air. Why would you do this? He asked finally. Because I was never yours to erase. But I didn't say that. Instead, I ended the call the way he ended our last conversation before the cruise, without a goodbye. I set the phone down, quietly, face down on the box beside me. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was mine. They were supposed to be gone for another 5 days. 5 days of spa treatments, curated dinners, overpriced drinks poured on a deck that never touched shore. 5 days to pretend they were successful, stress-free, the perfect couple with a tidy future waiting for them at home. But the paperwork caught up with them at 30,000 feet. Amara told me later it hit Declan's inbox somewhere over Colorado, right after takeoff from LAX. The plane had barely leveled when the email landed. Notice of asset freeze. Emergency legal notice regarding revocation of financial access and guardianship claims. Certification of trust activation. He would have opened them on his phone. Sky probably peering over his shoulder, still smiling from the photos she'd taken at the dock, bright dress, big sunglasses, caption ready for posting. I imagined the color draining from her face. Not from the turbulence, but from the realization that they didn't own a damn thing. They booked a red-eye home, cut the cruise short, paid 3 times the original fare just to get back ahead of the news. By the time they landed, the first wave of public documentation had already reached their lawyer's office. Amara had made sure of that. Her firm had no interest in drama, only facts. And the facts were stacked, time-stamped, notarized. Their names weren't on the deed. Their financial access had been removed by the grantor me. The trust had been established years ago and remained untouched by them since. They could dispute it if they wanted. File motions. Hire new counsel. But no emergency court was going to overturn a trust created long before their marriage, especially not while elder abuse accusations hovered like storm clouds above their heads. I imagine the silence in the back seat of the rideshare from the airport. Sky scrolling through headlines, Declan clenching his jaw, trying to plan their next move. He was always better when he had control. Now he was flying blind. I didn't need to see their faces to know what it looked like. I'd seen that expression on Declan once years ago, when he realized he couldn't cheat on a college exam without consequences. He got caught then too. But back then, I covered for him. This time, I wasn't shielding anyone. By the time they pulled into the driveway, the locks had been changed. The alarm code was deactivated and reprogrammed. The mailbox had a new placard with my trust's name on it. and I was sitting beneath the basement window, sipping rainwater from a mason jar, listening to the wind move through the cracks in the foundation like an old friend whispering, "They're here." They wanted the storm to come and go while they floated above it. But they forgot something. You can't escape a storm when it starts at home. Amara never said she'd go to the press, but I knew she would. She waited until the legal notices had cleared, until the freeze was final, the trust fully activated, and the firm had a file thick enough to crush any counterclaim they tried to mount. Then she made a single call. The story broke 2 days later. The headline wasn't subtle. Locked in and left behind. Local woman claims son abandoned her without food or water. I read it sitting on the basement steps, sunlight creeping in through the glass like it had started to recognize me. The paper had used an old photo of me, one Amara must have pulled from my neighborhood association ID, the one where I'm not smiling, but my eyes are sharp. The article didn't sensationalize. It didn't need to. The facts were damning on their own. 68-year-old woman, left alone in a sealed home, no access to food, water, or outside contact, medical conditions untreated, cell phone destroyed, kitchen emptied, plumbing disabled, and the timing aligned perfectly with her son's week-long vacation. The paper ran quotes from unnamed legal sources, talked about the power of trust law, the importance of elder protections. Someone from Adult Services confirmed a welfare investigation had been opened. No charges yet, but everything under review. By the time the article was shared online, the town had already started whispering. Then the whispers turned into comments. The comments turned into phone calls. Sky's wellness brand organic skincare inspirational quotes, staged yoga poses, started shedding sponsors by noon. Boutique retailers pulled her products. A press release she'd scheduled for the following week was quietly deleted. People who once flooded her posts with hearts now filled them with disgust. You locked your mother-in-law in a house and went on vacation? Disgusting. You built your brand on fake compassion. I hope she sues you into silence. The cruelty they once coded in politeness was now dragged into the light. They couldn't manage the narrative anymore, couldn't soften the language, couldn't pivot. Because now the public had the words, elder abuse. And once that label lands, it doesn't let go. Declan didn't respond publicly. He never liked being seen when he couldn't control the framing. But someone leaked a statement, probably a lawyer scrambling to run damage control. It said, in part, "We are saddened by recent accusations. This is a private family matter and will be handled accordingly." Private. As if locking your mother in a house and cutting off the water supply was a household disagreement. As if what happened to me was a scheduling error. But no one bought it, because the silence I'd lived with for years, the swallowing of pain, the tolerance, the careful nodding, the smile while being erased, had become the very thing they couldn't silence anymore. It had become the microphone. And now, every polite cruelty, every smirk disguised as care, every calculated absence, they all echoed louder than Sky's pastel filters and Declan's corporate bios. They thought they buried me in that house. Instead, I became the headline. And the headline would outlive their version of the story. They arrived sometime after 7. I knew from the tires' thick tread, smooth stop. Declan always parked too close to the azaleas. Never noticed the roots. Never cared. From the basement window, I could see their feet first. Sky's white sandals. Declan's expensive boots, the ones he only wore to seem important. They walked up like they owned the place. Sky reached for the handle. The alarm screamed. A high-pitched wail that split the quiet air in two. Lights flashed from the porch, and side yard synchronized like a warning. She jumped back. Declan tried to punch in the code, his old code. It didn't work. He tried again. Then a third time. Still nothing. The system locked down. I watched as he turned in slow circles, scanning the windows like he expected to see me peering out from one. But I didn't move. Not yet. That house, my house, no longer recognized him, and I wasn't about to change that. 3 minutes later, the sheriff's cruiser rolled to a stop at the edge of the gravel drive. Not with lights, not with sirens, just presence. Deputy Halverson. Kind man, middle-aged, grew up in this county. He was one of the few people who used to ask about Robert even years after he passed. He stepped out slowly, tipped his head toward Declan. Evening, he said, calm but clear. Declan was already wound tight. This is a mistake. This is my mother's house. No, Sir Halverson said, pulling a folded document from his chest pocket. This property's protected under a private trust. Signed and recorded. You're not on it. Skye opened her mouth to argue, but he held up a second slip of paper. And there's a notice filed with the county, he added, voice still even. Elder welfare concern. Until that's resolved, you're not to approach the residence or attempt entry. This is a formal warning. Declan's voice rose. She's my mother. Halverson didn't flinch. And yet she had to file an emergency notice to stop you from locking her inside this home. The silence that followed was louder than the alarm. Skye grabbed Declan's arm, whispering something sharp I couldn't hear. He yanked away. She's lying, he said, finally. She's confused. She's old. You think she set this up herself? He said old, like it was rot, like it proved him right. Halverson didn't respond. He just stepped between them and the door. Declan's shoulders dropped, not in defeat, in calculation. He wasn't done. But he'd lost today. I watched them walk back to the car. No bags, no keys, no control. The alarm system reset once their vehicle cleared the driveway. I stood slowly and made my way upstairs. My legs ached, but they held. The light through the kitchen window was gold. The kind of gold that only comes after people try to take something from you and fail. I unlocked the door to the front hallway, stepped inside, and the house felt like mine again. They came back the next day. Different clothes, softer posture, slower steps, but the same goal. This time they didn't park in the driveway. They left the car on the street like distance might clean the stain, like arriving from a few feet farther away might rewrite what they'd already done. I stood behind the curtain in the front room, the one that faced the porch. I didn't move, just watched. Skye stepped forward first. Her makeup was gone, or maybe she'd finally stopped trying to hide behind it. Her eyes were red. From crying or rage, I couldn't tell. Maybe both. Declan stayed behind her. He didn't look up at the house at first, just kept his head down, arms limp at his sides. He didn't reach for the door this time. Didn't test the knob. Skye knocked once. A soft, tentative knock, like the sound a stranger makes. Calla, she called out, voice strained. Please. She looked around as if expecting a neighbor to witness her humility. But no one came. Just the sound of wind brushing against the gutter and a few dry leaves scratching across the porch. Declan finally looked up. His face was pale, swollen at the eyes. He looked like a boy again, but not the one in the photo I used to carry. This boy looked empty. He stepped forward beside Skye and spoke low. Mom, just let us explain. His voice cracked at the word mom like it hurt to say. Skye reached out and touched the door palm flat against the wood. We didn't mean she started, but her words died in the wind. They stood there for a long time, together, united in shame, or maybe strategy. I couldn't tell anymore where their feelings ended and their angles began. I watched them through the curtain. Not hidden, just quiet. And I felt nothing. No rage, no vengeance, no ache, just distance. The kind of distance you build plank by plank after years of setting boundaries no one honored. The kind of distance that holds. They looked up at the window once, both of them. Sky's eyes scanned the glass. Declan's gaze paused just beneath it, like he knew I was there. Waiting, measuring, deciding. I met his stare for just a moment through the thin veil of fabric. He didn't flinch. Neither did I. Then I let the curtain fall. No words, no gesture, no opening of the door. They knocked once more, softer than before, and waited. But the silence answered for me. And after a while, they turned and left. This time, they didn't look back. And I didn't watch them go. I took my coffee black that morning. No cream, no sugar. Just heat and truth. The mug fit neatly in my hand, worn smooth from years of use. It was one of the few things that had never gone missing, never been questioned, never been taken and returned in a different place. It was mine, like the porch, like the deed, like the silence. I sat in the chair Robert built before his hands started shaking. It still creaked in the same place just beneath the left arm. I never fixed it. Some sounds are worth keeping. The air was crisp but kind. The kind of breeze that moves around you like it knows not to interrupt. I pulled my sweater tighter, took another sip, and let the porch hold me. The newspaper lay folded on the side table headline, tucked just beneath a photo of me I hadn't known Amara still had. Not one of those polished photos. Just me on the front lawn, arms crossed, smiling at something out of frame. The article below it told a version of the truth, stripped of drama, but not of weight. Elder abuse allegations under review. Property restored to trust owner. It didn't name them. It didn't have to. Everyone already knew. They hadn't returned since the second visit. Sky's apology email came first, blaming stress, miscommunication, poor choices made under the wrong advice. I didn't reply. Then Declan's voicemail. Just one. No apology. No admission. Just static breath and a single line I thought you'd understand. I didn't play it again. I scrolled to the end, hovered over the delete icon for a long moment, and then tapped. The message disappeared. Not with drama. Not with closure. Just gone. Like a note you toss in the fire and never watch burn. The coffee was still hot when I set the phone down. I stared out at the street. A few neighbors waved as they passed. One nodded and kept walking head down, pretending not to know. That was fine. I wasn't collecting sympathy. I wasn't performing pain. I had no need for that anymore. I still locked the doors at night. Still checked the windows. I knew the law was on my side, but memory has longer legs than justice. It runs ahead, reminding you who you were before people made you smaller. But this morning, this porch, this mug, this breeze, it didn't feel like recovery. It felt like living. No ceremony. No speech. Just a woman in her home drinking her coffee. And knowing finally that leaving the door closed wasn't cruelty. It was survival with boundaries. And the quiet. It didn't ache anymore. It healed.